There are moments in life, aren't there, when you think you understand everything, when the ground beneath your feet feels solid, unshakable. I certainly did. 68 years I've walked this earth, and I thought I'd seen it all, felt it, all but some scars. They run so deep, they change the very landscape of your soul. This is one of those stories, a story from the golden haze of Los Angeles, where the sun always seemed to promise a brighter tomorrow, until it didn't. This isn't just about pain, dear ones. It's about betrayal so profound it rips the very fabric of who you are, leaving you to wonder if you ever knew the person sleeping beside you. Imagine, for a moment, the man you vowed to spend eternity with, the father of your children, looking on with a smile as your world shattered around you. A smile, as if it were all just a play, and you, the unwitting lead in a tragedy. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Unthinkable. But it happened, and it changed everything, until I simply vanished. Before I delve into the raw, aching heart of it all, if you find yourself drawn into this quiet corner of my memory, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider giving this video a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear a story of resilience, even when it feels like there's none left, would mean the world. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me share these quiet truths. And I'm always curious, where are you listening from today? What country brings you here to my story? Let me know in the comments below. Now, where was I? Oh yes, before the storm, before the smile, there was a life. My life. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for decades, my life in Los Angeles was a tapestry woven with sunshine, the scent of orange blossoms, and the comforting rhythm of everyday routines. We lived in a charming, slightly faded bungalow in Silver Lake, the kind with a bougainvillea vine climbing wildly over the porch and a backyard that hummed with bees in the spring. It wasn't grand, not Hollywood Hills opulent, but it was ours. It was home. My husband, Arthur, was a quiet man, a structural engineer. He designed bridges and buildings, things that stood strong against the elements, things that were supposed to last. He had a steady gait, hands always clean, and a meticulous way of speaking that sometimes made me smile. He wasn't one for grand gestures or effusive declarations of love, but his presence was a constant, like the sturdy oak tree in our front yard. We met at a university mixer, decades ago, two shy young things adrift in a sea of boisterous youth. He was kind, dependable, and he made me feel safe. That feeling, that sense of unwavering safety, was the bedrock of our existence. We built a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment. Our two children, Sarah and Michael, grew up within those walls, their laughter echoing through the halls, their crayon drawings still tucked away in old shoeboxes in the attic. We had our rituals, Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks around the reservoir, quiet nights on the porch swing, listening to the crickets. Arthur would read his engineering journals, and I'd knit or simply watch the stars emerge, feeling utterly content. Our arguments were minor, quickly resolved. Our disagreements, easily navigated. We were a team, a unit, or so I believed with every fiber of my being. Life wasn't without its gentle undulations. Of course, there were the usual financial worries, the anxieties of raising children in a fast-paced city, the aches and pains of growing older. But through it all, Arthur was my anchor. He was the one who fixed the leaky faucet, who patiently explained complicated tax forms, who held my hand when I was anxious. His calm demeanor was a balm to my often worrying nature. He was my rock, my absolute rock. And that, perhaps, was my greatest vulnerability. I had placed so much of my trust, so much of my identity, in his steadfastness. I never, not once, considered that the foundation could crumble. The first tremor, the slightest crack in that perceived bedrock, came subtly. It wasn't a sudden earthquake, more like a persistent, unsettling vibration. Arthur started working later, much later. He'd come home after midnight, smelling faintly of something I couldn't quite place. Not alcohol, not another woman's perfumey, just different. He'd say it was a new project, a demanding client, and I, ever trusting, would nod and make him a warm drink, never questioning beyond a superficial inquiry. My Arthur was dedicated, after all. He was a good provider. He worked hard for us. Then came the calls. Strange, hushed conversations he'd take in the garage, or out in the yard, always away from me. When I'd ask who it was, he'd offer a vague explanation, something about colleagues, or an old university friend. His eyes, though, they held a flicker of something new, a guardedness, a fleeting nervousness I'd never seen before. It was like watching a familiar landscape slowly, imperceptibly shift beneath a growing shadow. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was simply the stress of his work, perhaps a secret birthday surprise he was planning for me. My mind, bless its naive heart, desperately sought logical, harmless explanations for these small, accumulating oddities. But the oddities continued to pile up, like small stones gathering at the base of a towering wall. He started to become withdrawn, less communicative. The quiet nights on the porch swing became rarer, replaced by him disappearing into his study, the door closed. He'd spend hours on his computer, the glow from the screen illuminating his face in a way that made him look like a stranger. When I'd tried to engage him, to ask about his day, he'd give clipped, short answers, or simply wave a dismissive hand. It felt as if a glass wall was slowly, silently rising between us, making genuine connection impossible. The air in our home, once so warm and comfortable, began to feel thin, stretched, almost brittle. I felt a chill, a persistent unease that no amount of sunshine could dispel. Then came the financial strain. We had always been comfortable, not wealthy, but certainly secure. Arthur handled all the finances, a role he had taken on naturally from the beginning of our marriage. He had always been so careful, so prudent. But suddenly, bills were piling up, unopened. Calls from banks and creditors started coming, polite at first, then increasingly urgent. When I confronted him, his answers were vague, evasive. Just a temporary setback, Eleanor, he'd say, a few investments not performing as expected. His voice would be calm, almost too calm, and a cold dread would settle in the pit of my stomach. My rock, it seemed, was starting to crumble, not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious erosion. The real shift, the true beginning of the nightmare, started when he began to spend less time at home, even on weekends. He'd say he had to meet clients or oversee a critical phase of a project, always vague, always just out of reach. And I, foolish, trusting Eleanor, believed him. I wanted to believe him. The alternative, the dark suspicions that sometimes flickered at the edges of my mind, were too terrifying to contemplate. I convinced myself that he was under immense pressure, that he was trying to protect me from something, that he still loved me, that he was still my Arthur. The house felt emptier, colder. Our children, now grown and living their own lives, would call and ask about him. "He's just busy, dear," I'd tell Sarah, my voice a little too bright, a little too forced. Michael, ever the more perceptive one, would sometimes ask, "Is everything all right, Mom? You sound tired." I'd brush it off, put on a brave face, but inside, a knot of fear tightened with each passing day. The man I knew, the man I had loved for over 4 decades, was slipping away, replaced by a shadow, a stranger, with familiar eyes. In the worst part, I couldn't understand why. I couldn't grasp what was happening, what force was pulling him, and our life, apart. The suspense of it, the not knowing, was a torment all its own. It was a slow, agonizing descent into a reality I never could have imagined. And the smile, oh that smile, was yet to come. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, crisp and cold as the December air outside. It wasn't Arthur, but a voice I didn't recognize, a woman's voice, formal and clipped. She introduced herself as an attorney, representing a consortium of creditors. And then, the words, delivered with a detached professionalism that only amplified their devastating impact, began to fall like ice chips. Our home, our beautiful bungalow, the very ground beneath my feet, was in foreclosure. Not just any foreclosure, but one that was already far along in the process. It was a legal labyrinth, she explained, intricate and irrefutable. Arthur, it seemed, had taken out multiple loans against the house, loans I knew nothing about, loans he had defaulted on months ago. My breath caught in my throat. The receiver felt heavy, suddenly too much for my trembling hand. I remember staring out the kitchen window, at the vibrant green of our backyard, a space that suddenly felt utterly alien. It was as if someone had pulled a rug from under me, not a small mat, but the very foundation of my existence. I stammered, tried to ask questions, but the answers were like a foreign language, legal terms and financial jargon swirling around a core of unspeakable truth. We were losing everything. When Arthur finally came home that evening, The air in the house was thick with unspoken dread. He walked in, his usual measured pace, and found me sitting at the kitchen table. The foreclosure notice spread out before me like a death sentence. My hands were shaking, tears blurring the words on the page. He saw it, saw me, and a flicker, just the flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, crossed his face. Was it surprise? Resignation? I couldn't tell. "Arthur," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "What is this? What have you done?" He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the refrigerator, opened it, and poured himself a glass of water, his movements unnervingly calm. That's when I saw it, truly saw it, for the very first time. Not the fleeting glimpse I'd caught before, but a slow, deliberate spreading across his features, a subtle upturn of the corners of his mouth, a slight crinkle around his eyes. It wasn't a wide, joyful smile, not at all. It was something far more chilling, a faint, almost imperceptible curving of his lips, a look of satisfaction. He took a long sip of water, placed the glass down with a soft click, and then turned to me. His eyes, usually so placid, seemed to hold a distant, almost cold amusement. "It's for the best, Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of emotion. It had to be done. My stomach lurched. The words felt like physical blows. For the best. How could losing everything be for the best? How could he stand there, looking at the wreckage of our lives, and utter such a phrase with that expression on his face? I felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of disorientation. This wasn't my Arthur. This was someone else entirely, inhabiting his skin. The days that followed were a blur of frantic, desperate activity. I called lawyers, friends, even our children, though I tried to shield them from the full horror of it. Sarah, my sensible Sarah, tried to help, sifting through documents, making calls. Michael, ever the protector, wanted to confront his father, but I begged him not to. I still held on to some sliver of hope, some desperate, irrational belief that there was a misunderstanding, a way to fix it. But Arthur remained a ghost in our own home, detached, remote, his quiet smile occasionally gracing his lips when he thought I wasn't looking. It was like living with a polite, well-dressed executioner. The true nature of his deception began to unravel, piece by agonizing piece. It wasn't just the house. He had systematically liquidated our savings, our retirement funds, even the small inheritance my mother had left me. Every single cent gone, vanished. He hadn't lost it in bad investments. He had deliberately, meticulously drained it, funneling it into what I still didn't know the full extent, the dark purpose behind his actions, but the immediate reality was devastating. We were utterly, completely destitute. The creditors' calls became more frequent, more aggressive, the legal notices, less formal, more threatening. Every knock at the door sent a jolt of panic through me. I stopped sleeping. When I did drift off, it was into nightmares of being pursued, of losing my footing, of falling into a bottomless pit. Arthur, meanwhile, would simply retreat further into himself, occasionally offering a bland platitude, always with that faint, unsettling smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. It was as if he was enjoying my torment, feeding off my despair. The day they came to evict us is etched into my memory with a sharpness that still makes my breath catch. The sheriff's deputies were polite but firm. The movers, efficient and emotionless, began systematically packing our life into cardboard boxes. Things that had decades of memories attached to them, reduced to anonymous bundles. My grandmother's rocking chair, the old piano where Sarah learned her first notes, the worn tapestry I had bought on our honeymoon in Italy, all of it being carted away. Strangers touching the most intimate parts of our lives. I stood there, amidst the chaos, amidst the stripping away of everything I had ever known, and Arthur stood just a few feet away. He was watching the process, his hands clasped behind his back, a faint smile on his face. It wasn't malicious, not overtly cruel, but it was there, a quiet, contented smile. It was the smile of a man who had accomplished a difficult task, a man who was satisfied with his work. And in that moment, as the last of our belongings were loaded onto the truck, as the front door closed, sealing away 40 years of memories, I understood. He wasn't just letting them hurt me. He was actively, deliberately, the one inflicting the pain, and he was enjoying it. That was the turning point. Not the phone call, not the notices, but that smile. In that instant, something inside me broke, and at the same time, something new, fierce and cold, began to coalesce. The woman who stood in that empty house, watching her life vanish, was no longer Eleanor Vance, the trusting wife, the devoted mother. She was simply a shill, a vessel of shock and a nascent, terrible clarity. The familiar world had dissolved, and I was left adrift, naked and exposed. And as the movers finished, as the deputies prepared to leave, I knew with an absolute certainty that I could not, would not, stay. I could not be tethered to this smiling monster, this architect of my ruin. My daughter, Sarah, arrived shortly after they left, her face etched with worry. She found me standing in the empty living room, surrounded by nothing but ghosts and the faint scent of stale dust. I must have looked like a wild thing, disheveled and hollow-eyed. She tried to talk to me, to offer comfort, but her words felt distant, like echoes in a vast, empty chamber. All I could think of was that smile, burned into my retina, searing into my soul. It was the smile of absolute finality. That night, for the first time in over 40 years, I did not sleep in my own bed. Sarah insisted I come to her small apartment across town. It was a kind gesture, one born of love and desperation. But I felt like a burden, a shattered piece of pottery she was trying to glue back together. Her husband, David, was awkward but well-meaning, bringing me tea, trying to make small talk, but I couldn't engage. My mind was a vortex of disbelief and a chilling, creeping understanding. The next few weeks were a hazy blur of legal consultations, each one more disheartening than the last. The lawyers confirmed what I already knew in my gut. Arthur had meticulously planned this. He had hidden assets, created shell companies, and diverted funds with a chilling precision. It was not a mistake, not a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, calculated act of financial destruction, aimed squarely at me. The question remained, why? Why would the man I loved, the man I had built a life with, do this? I confronted him, one last time, at his lawyer's office. He sat across the polished table, immaculately dressed, his posture as rigid and composed as ever. And that smile, that faint, unsettling curve of his lips, was still there. When I demanded to know why, his answer was delivered in the same calm, measured tone he used when discussing structural loads. Because, Eleanor, he said, his gaze meeting mine, utterly devoid of warmth, you stifled me, you always held me back. Now I am free. Free. The word hung in the air, a cruel, mocking chime. Free from what? From love, from commitment, from the life we had built together. It was then, in that cold, sterile room, that I understood the depth of his malice. He hadn't just destroyed our financial stability. He had systematically dismantled my sense of self, my trust, my entire world. And he felt no remorse. In fact, he seemed to relish it. I left that meeting and walked out into the bright Los Angeles sunshine, but it felt like the coldest day of my life. The thought of starting over, of rebuilding from absolute zero, at 68 years old, was crushing. My children tried to help, offering to take me in, but I couldn't bear the thought of being a permanent charity case. Their lives were their own, their futures unburdened by my devastating past. I needed to find my own way, however uncertain that path might be. The long-term impact of Arthur's betrayal was insidious, far-reaching beyond the obvious financial ruin. It shattered my sense of security, my belief in human goodness. I became wary, suspicious. Every kindness, every offer of help, was met with a flicker of doubt. Could I trust this person? What was their motive? The world, once a place of comfort and predictability, had become a minefield of potential betrayals. I felt a constant, low-level anxiety, a tightening in my chest that wouldn't abate. I took what little I had left, a few $100s from an old, emergency stash I'd kept hidden from Arthur, God bless my foresight, and found a tiny, run-down room for rent in a less-than-desirable part of the city. It was a far cry from my bougainvillea-covered bungalow. The walls were thin, the mattress lumpy, and the street outside was alive with unfamiliar, often unsettling sounds, but it was mine. It was a place where I could begin to breathe, however shallowly. The initial struggle was immense. I, who had never truly worked outside the home, suddenly found myself needing to earn every penny. I tried everything: cleaning houses, babysitting, even a brief, humiliating stint as a telemarketer. My voice cracking as I read scripts about extended car warranties. My body, accustomed to a life of relative ease, ached constantly. My pride, once a quiet companion, was shattered into a million pieces. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, a quiet, internal wail of grief for the life I had lost, for the woman I used to be. But slowly, very slowly, a new kind of resilience began to emerge. It wasn't the strong, unwavering resilience of a young person. It was the gnarled, stubborn resilience of an old oak tree, weathering a storm. I started going to the public library, not just to escape the confines of my tiny room, but to learn. I read books on budgeting, on finding odd jobs, on navigating government assistance programs, things I never imagined I'd need to know. I found a part-time job at a local community center, helping with administrative tasks. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it gave me a sense of purpose, however small. The emotional toll, though, was the hardest to overcome. The grief wasn't just for the loss of material things, it was for the loss of my innocence, my belief in unconditional love. I saw Arthur occasionally, in courtrooms, his face as inscrutable as ever, his smile still present, though perhaps less pronounced. Each sighting was a fresh wound, a reminder of the man who had destroyed me with such calm detachment. It was a pain that festered, keeping me awake at night, whispering doubts in my ear. But then, one day, as I was walking through a park, watching children play, I saw an elderly couple, holding hands, their faces lined with decades of shared history, and I realized something profound. What Arthur did to me was a reflection of him, not of me. His malice, his desire to be free at my expense, was his burden to carry, not mine. I had carried his burden for too long. In that moment, a quiet understanding settled over me. I could choose to be defined by his betrayal, or I could choose to reclaim myself. The wisdom I gained from this nightmare was hard-won, etched into my very bones. First, never, ever put your entire trust, your entire identity, into another person, no matter how much you love them. Always keep a part of yourself, a small, independent core, safe and separate. Second, the kindness of strangers and the steadfast love of true friends and family are treasures beyond measure. My children, despite their own struggles, never gave up on me. My friends, though initially shocked, rallied around me with what little they could offer: a warm meal, a listening ear, a ride to an appointment. These were the true riches. And finally, I learned that strength isn't about never falling, but about finding the courage to get back up, even when every fiber of your being screams to stay down. It isn't about being fearless, but about acting, despite the fear. I am not the same Eleanor Vance who lived in that bungalow. The sunshine feels different now, filtered through a lens of profound experience, but I am still here. I survived. I rebuilt, not a grand estate, but a life built on a new foundation: self-reliance, quiet dignity, and a profound appreciation for the simple, honest truths. I learned that sometimes, disappearing from one life is the only way to truly appear in another. My old self, the trusting, naive wife, vanished forever that day. But in her place, a new Eleanor emerged, scarred, yes, but unbroken. And for that, I am, against all odds, profoundly grateful. It has been years now since I walked away from that empty house, since I watched Arthur's smiling face as our life was dismantled. The immediate shock, that searing pain of betrayal, has dulled with time, as most sharp edges do. But it has left a permanent imprint, a kind of phantom limb ache where my old self used to be. My hair, once a lively auburn, is now a soft, silver, white, and the lines on my face tell stories that no mirror could fully capture. I live in a small apartment now, not quite a room, but certainly not a bungalow. It's on the second floor of an older building in a quiet neighborhood, far from the bustling glamour of central Los Angeles. I have a small balcony where I keep a few potted herbs: rosemary, basil, a tiny lavender plant. The scent of them on a warm evening brings a small measure of peace. It's not the scent of orange blossoms, but it's enough. My days are simpler now, stripped bare of the complexities and anxieties that had, unknowingly, become part of my life with Arthur. I still work part-time at the community center. It's mostly helping seniors with their paperwork, listening to their stories, sometimes just making them a cup of tea. It's humbling work, but it's honest, and it connects me to people who understand struggle, who have faced their own share of disappointments. We share a quiet camaraderie, a silent acknowledgement of lives lived, often imperfectly, but always with a tenacious spirit. My children visit when they can. Sarah, bless her heart, still worries about me, still tries to sneak extra groceries into my fridge. Michael calls often, his voice a comforting rumble. We talk about their lives, their children, my grandchildren, who are growing up far too fast. I see a piece of Arthur in Michael sometimes, a certain quiet intensity, and it's a momentary jolt, a cold shiver. But then I see his kindness, his fierce loyalty, and I know he is truly my son, a man shaped by more than just his father's genes. I've never told them the full, ugly truth of Arthur's smile. Not really. How could I? How could I taint their image of their father, however flawed he might be? Some burdens you simply carry alone. The financial recovery has been slow, a painstaking climb up a steep hill. I learned to budget like a hawk, to stretch every dollar. I learned the value of a coupon, the taste of simple, home-cooked meals, the comfort of a good book borrowed from the library. There are no luxuries, no lavish vacations, no new cars. But there is a quiet freedom in that simplicity. The constant chase, the unspoken pressure to keep up, is gone. I live within my means, and there is a deep, abiding peace in that dot. The hardest part, even now, is the lingering echo of distrust. When someone offers a compliment, I search their eyes for hidden motives. When an unexpected kindness comes my way, a small part of me braces for the catch. It's a sad legacy, this scar on my soul, but I fight it. I actively choose to believe in goodness, to extend grace, even when my instincts scream caution, because to succumb to cynicism completely, to let Arthur's malice define my view of the entire world, would be to let him win, truly win, and that I refuse to do. I often think about that moment, standing in the empty house, watching him smile. It was the moment I disappeared from his life, yes, but more importantly, it was the moment I began to reappear in my own. It was the ultimate betrayal, a wound that will never fully heal, but it was also, strangely, a catalyst. It forced me to look inwards, to find a strength I never knew I possessed. It stripped away all the comfortable illusions, all the layers of dependency, and left me with the stark, terrifying truth of my own resilience. What I've learned, what I want to impart to anyone who listens to this quiet story, is that life can be unimaginably cruel. The people you trust most can shatter you beyond recognition. But even in the deepest despair, even when everything you thought was solid crumbles to dust, there is still a choice. You can choose to be consumed by the ashes, or you can choose to rise from them. It's not easy, not by a long shot. There will be tears, moments of utter despair, days when simply putting one foot in front of the other feels impossible. But if you keep going, if you hold on to that flicker of dignity, that stubborn refusal to be defeated, you will find your way. My life is quiet now. It's not the grand tapestry I once envisioned, but it is rich in its own way, rich with the appreciation of small mercies, the warmth of genuine connection, and the profound wisdom that comes from walking through fire and emerging, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. And sometimes, when I sit on my small balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I smile. Not a smile of malice or satisfaction, but a quiet, knowing smile. A smile of survival, a smile of freedom, truly earned. I disappeared, yes, but in that vanishing, I found myself